Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Welcome to the lecture number 12, week number 3 on the NPTEL module of strategic trade and trade protectionism, trade theories and policies, empirics on it, how we can define all possible strategies to facilitate trade. Now, we are concentrating on various theories of international trade. So, this is our third week where we have already taken off in the previous lecture for the understanding of new classical trade theories, where the most important aspect or the feature of this trade theory is the production function, that is very realistic and exhibiting increasing opportunity cost of production. Is it clear? Now, so this lecture is an extension of the previous lecture, where we are emphasizing one of the most important discussed trade theory, modern trade theory called Heckscher-Ohlin theory. In short, it is also called HO theory. HO theory is very famous in the international trade theory discussion, and there are a number of implications of this theory. So, myself Dr. Pratap Mohanty, faculty member of Department of Humanities and Social Science, IIT Roorkee. So, I will be explaining various possibilities of trade strategies we are derived from it. Now onwards, in another 2-3 lectures, we are for sure going to give you a complete wrap up on strategic trade. Especially we will attach the supply side aspects. We have already discussed in the previous class on the production possibility frontier, commodity indifference curves, and their autarky equilibrium point. So, these are already covered. Now, we will be deriving economies out of it or the possibility of trade out of it. So, these are the two persons experts on international trade, and here Heckscher and Ohlin. So, they are very famous in the in international trade discussions. So, this is basically an extension of the comparative advantage theory to a more realistic format, and where the effect of international trade on labor is very clearly defined. So, then what are the assumptions? There might be a question if it is descriptive in some format, but largely our evaluation will be based on objective test, MCQ based test, and the MCQs are more informative. Like you cannot just be quick to determine one option, you have to calculate, sometimes do rough work on it. So, and there are possibility of number of logical thinking on it, so to arrive into the answer. So, though it is objective test we are going to follow largely MCQ based, but a straight answer is not derived, you have to apply the techniques. Now, if it is a descriptive one, somewhere else you are writing it, then usually the questions are like critically examine the HO theory of international trade. So, when the criticality of any theory is concerned, we are supposed to understand by their caveats or their limitations. So, limitations are actually based on the assumptions. So, based on certain assumptions, the theory actually explained many important aspects which are quite good for deriving better strategies. So, first assumption is likewise in the classical theory we explained 2 by 2 by 1, here it is 2 by 2 by 2 model. So, 2 by 2 stands for 2 countries, 2 goods and 2 factors here. This is a new addition in this format. Now, technology is same in both the nations while we are discussing trade across the countries, and so commodity X is assumed to be labor intensive and Y is vice versa capital intensive in both the nations, and constant returns to scale follows while explaining the or mapping the trade from one point to another trade and one point to another point for the possibility of international trade. Now, constant returns to scale does not mean there is no increasing opportunity cost of production in the production function. They believe on non-linearity in the production function, but if we add extra 1 unit of resources to a particular commodity, that commodity will be actually exhibiting with equal return or that extent or proportional return, which is called and explained from the origin with a ray from the origin, we explained in the previous class. Now, since the production function exhibit non-linearity or increasing opportunity cost function, complete specialization is impossible, and also assumed by these two, the two economists, and so far as specialization is concerned. So, other assumptions are taste and preferences should remain equal. If there are very major change in the taste and preferences, then postulating any information out of it is very difficult. So, both commodities and factors are traded in perfectly competitive markets. Basically, the market must be competitive, the prices for the commodities as well as factors, this is also an assumption in the earlier model as well. Many assumptions are similar in classical theory also, but this is very essential, because if prices are changed or are different or are unexpected, if it gets changed with the strategic behavior of another one, then predicting based on these theories is very difficult. So, they go by these assumption. Perfect mobility within the nation and zero mobility across the nations, especially for the factors. No transportation cost, tariffs and other barriers for free trade. All resources are fully employed in both the nations. If there are still potential resources attached, so the cost of production obviously is expected to be declining, and it influences the market and cannot be defined to be perfectly competitive. So, therefore, this is one of the important assumptions also. And international trade is actually balanced, the trade between the nations expected to be balanced. So, those are the assumptions. So, let us explain 2 or 3 assumptions very carefully. One is perfectly mobile factors within the nation. So, what it stands for? It purely stands for the same wage rate earned in both the industries of each country, because we have already made within the country perfect mobility, same rental earned for another factor each country for both the industries, identical and homothetic preferences across countries. So, the poorer country, it means the poorer country will actually buy less of both rice or airplane, if you are taking two assumption, two products, whereas the same ratio as a richer country facing but in the same ratio as a richer country facing the same prices. So, it means the poorer country will buy less as compared to the ratio of the products with the richer country, but the ratio to be so poorer country will buy less of both the rice and by quantity same, but the ratio is same for small and big country. So, our interest is to look at the relative relative demand for commodity X and Y, and accordingly we have lots of interpretations. So, though it is not a realistic assumption, but it allows us to focus our attention on difference in resources as the sole reason for trade. So, this theory as developed by Heckscher-Ohlin is also called factor endowment theory. Factor endowment theory. Endowment theory of international trade. Now, they define conceptualize the theory in various concepts, through various concepts like factor intensity and factor abundance. So, what do you mean by factor intensity? Suppose there are two commodities, we have already assumed commodity X to be labor intensive and commodity Y to be capital intensive. And so, labor intensive, capital intensive means more capital as compared to labor, K by L should be higher than that of K by L in another industry. So, I mean X is capital intensive, labor intensive and Y is capital intensive. So, capital labor ratio used in the production Y is greater than that of capital labor ratio used in the production of X. So, it is not the absolute amount of capital that matters to define factor intensity, rather the relative allocation of resources or the endowments. Now, this is visible here, nation 1 and nation 2. We have assumed that commodity X is labor intensive. Here it is commodity X and its extent of labor and capital use. So, this ray is for commodity X where more labor is utilized, and for this is for Y, expansion path of Y where more capital is relatively used higher as compared to X. But in nation 2 again we said X is labor intensive, we are using more, I mean in nation 2 they are using more labor as compared to another one, capital. Now, how to define factor abundance? Factor abundance are largely defined in two ways. One is through their availability of the physical units, another one is their market determining prices of those factors. So, factor abundance means in terms of physical units, basically total capital by total labor availability, Tk by Tl. So, here it is, let it be foreign country, its ratio I mean again it is in relative terms, not by just K by K is greater than L is not the answer, it should be relatively higher. K upon L as a ratio should be higher as compared to another nation. So, this is called the availability by physical units, whereas whereas we can also define the abundance through the relative prices of the factors. If wage rate is lesser than that of rent they are paying, so I mean the country is more abundant with laborer. Now, in this diagram it is easily identified that look at the X and look at the Y. So, we have already defined the previous diagram. So, accordingly the PPP is actually presented. PPP can be presented, X is more tilted towards this X, I mean towards X axis, I mean production of this, whereas Y using more of capital intensive factors. So, and can be interpreted differently. So, we will explain in the next couple of slides. So, factor abundance by relative factor prices, as I said. So, it depends upon the relative prices in two countries, maybe in terms of wage to rent or rent to wage ratio. If they are different, then it will be defined accordingly. Now, factor abundance in terms of relative factor prices is presented where it is not absolute level of R that matters, even similar to the absolute availability of physical capital we defined in the previous slide. So, it is the relative ratio of prices of the factors that really matter. Now, in this production possibility frontier where nation 1 is more endowed with more X, but X we have already assumed to be labor intensive, and nation 2 is more endowed with the production of Y, since their Y is more capital abundant, and so that means they are more endowed with capital. Nation 2 is more endowed with more capital, so therefore they are producing more of Y varieties as against X varieties. So what another assumption very important, so we will take it this one in our empirical testing section as a criticism to the theory, where we will I mean the assumption is that the factor intensity reversal should not take place while understanding this theory. What do you mean by this? A same product cannot be labor intensive in one country and capital intensive in another country. Okay. So factor intensity is the relative capital labor ratio, we have already discussed, refers to the demand for the factors of the good. Regardless of the changes in W and WR, the factor intensity of one good relative to that of other does not change. So intensity does not change, and that too we cannot, another interpretation is that the intensity cannot be reversal, it cannot be just changed on the way we are explaining the Heckscher-Ohlin theory. If it is K by Y is more capital intensive, it should be maintained throughout the theory discussion. Here we have already explained, if there are any changes also, I mean if there is a shift like this, so still this should be defining higher capital relatively as compared to labor. Similarly here, if there will be shift, but this line cannot be shifted to this to explain the Heckscher-Ohlin theory, and Heckscher-Ohlin theory will be misleading its interpretations. Now, given these explanation, we have mainly we have largely explained here that the factor prices are same in the pre-trade, and the MRT marginal rate of transformation between two are same. So, now after any kind of shift, so there will be also shift in other cases, I mean other product. So, we may land up with again equal transformation, equal I mean MRT and its ratio should be maybe same in other context. Now, what we try to say, the fact that Y is here is endowed with, we have already assumed more of capital as compared to labor. So, it has reflection, if it is utilizing less of this, so relative prices of that should also fall, not just capital factor intensity explained with capital labor as a ratio, it should be explained with its factor prices. So, this should be monotonically connected. So, it means that if this is falling, this must be also falling, if this is falling, this must be also falling to explain the theory correctly. Okay. So, Heckscher-Ohlin theory what it talks about largely, it says that based on the assumption, it says that a country is endowed with certain variety of factors will specialize in the production of that type of variety of product and will export to another country in lieu of getting another product which the country does not have relative abundance of resources. So, a nation will export the commodity whose production requires the intensive use of the nation's relatively abundant resources or cheap factors, and import in lieu the commodity whose requires intensive use of nation's relatively scarce resource and expensive resource. So, that means the country is going to import where it has scarce resources or expensive factors, and the country is going to export the product or the commodity which it has relative abundance, not just abundance, relative abundance or the cheap factors. That is the whole idea of Heckscher-Ohlin theory. And Heckscher-Ohlin, in short, a labor rich nation will export relatively labor intensive commodity and vice versa. So, he explains comparative advantage rather than assuming it. We have already explained that it is again emphasizing the comparative advantage theory. So, now here what we define, nation 1 is more endowed with nation 1 is more endowed with X type of production and Y, and the trade will actually there will be possibility of trade if there will be equal level of consumption. Look at the consumption mapping here. If the consumptions level are equal, then what is going to happen? So, basically they are not going to demand more from another country. So, in this case what is going to happen? What will happen? And look at the factor prices, the ratios are different, these are not same. So, they are different, and the level of demand, though level of demand are same or at the same level, defined at a same level. So, but since the factor prices are different, there is a possibility of exchange. What the country will do, the commodity the country 1 will export to another country, since the relative prices will rise further, and since relative prices is less right now, it will rise, and since another country relative prices is higher, that will be reducing. So, there will be equalization of prices with this perpendicular with this tangential line, and the country will land up with a higher position explained with E prime. So, this is all about Heckscher-Ohlin theory largely explained with factor price equalization, which says that it is not just the products are exchanged and there are possible specialization. So, exchange benefits are there, specialization benefits are there, it will simultaneously lead to equalize the prices, which we have seen here in the previous diagram. We have seen that price ratio earlier was different by PA and PA prime, now it is only one tangential line. There is a possibility. How much they export or import, depending, this much is now exported by country 1 and importing this much and arriving at a higher position because they are getting variety of products, and whereas country 2 export this much of Y from near about 120 till around 70, and in lieu of 40 to around 90. So, and this depends upon their price ratio for sure, how much extent or exact extent they are exporting, but sure they are adding it. So, in both the cases they are landing in a higher equilibrium situation, and both are beneficial. So, therefore there should be trade. So, Heckscher-Ohlin theory largely talks about export and import and quid pro quo relationship, which is majorly based on availability of resources, and those and the availability of endowment actually boils down to higher level of satisfaction explained by the community indifference curve. And this also equated the factor price ratio across the nations, especially in 2 nations. So, therefore, it is called factor price equalization theorem as well. So, international trade will bring about equalization the relative and absolute terms to homogeneous factors across nations. So, this is important. Homogeneous in the sense absolute and homogeneous factors across nations. So, the homogeneous, the same variety of factors across the nation will get benefited out of it, but the differentiated factors or the different factors might be again differentiated, but largely they are actually equalized relatively. That is very important. We will take it in the specific factor model regarding this clarification further. Wages and other factors returns will be the same after specialization and trade has occurred. So, this holds only if Heckscher-Ohlin theorem holds. So, we have already explained this. Now, second part of Heckscher-Ohlin theory is basically in terms of factor price equalization. First part is actually there will be higher trade between 2 countries. We have already explained this theory. So, Heckscher-Ohlin largely we are discussing Heckscher-Ohlin theorem in terms of specialization and exchange. Now, we are also discussing factor price equalization. Now, factor price equalization simultaneously emphasized by in detail emphasized by Samuelson. So, this theory is also called Heckscher-Ohlin and Samuelson theorem, and he has published and his paper and received a Nobel Prize in 1970 because of his contribution largely to discuss income distribution, which is very rarely defined in international trade theory and emphasized especially in this theory. So, international trade theory we have already discussed brings equality in the relative prices of factors, and especially to the homogeneous factors, factors which are homogeneously defined, whereas if factors are very differently defined, it is too difficult to attach how much they are going to receive it, there are ambiguity to the distribution of income. And it also gives better income. International trade causes redistribution of income from relatively expensive to the relatively cheap factors. So, expensive means what? So, which were expensive now no longer going to be expensive because of the fact that the country which does not have that type of resources will actually will not emphasize or specialize in that particular product. Whichever has, I mean the country since has certain factors which are scarce, will try not to specialize since its factors are scarce and very expensive. So, after trade, so those product will actually be exchanged or imported to the country. So, therefore, those factors which are defined to be scarce are no longer no longer continuing with the same rate or higher rate. So, in after trade there are high possibility to the fact that the cheaper factors will be demanded more because of more exchange, the scarce factor or the expensive factors will be less demanded. So, therefore, the rate will be lesser in the concerned country. So, this will lead to redistribution of income. This is one of the very important contributions of Samuelson in association with Heckscher-Ohlin, because without the Heckscher-Ohlin proposition Samuelson won't have contributed its extra addition to it. This also says that factor, so diagrammatically we can explain that the prices of the factors and these differences will lead to the ratio of the factors. Okay. So, higher the prices due to trade, the relative prices of the factors will change, the scarce factors and its products, its prices will be actually lower, where the abundant factors and prices will be higher. So, relative prices will be expected to be higher. So, that will lead to the relative demand of those factors as well. So, wage rate as compared to rent will also rise. So, it will be rising. Similarly, I mean there will be a point, initially it will rise, if it start with a higher point it will be actually decline. If the relative prices are already high, so it will decline to a level and there will be a possibility of equalization, PB and PB prime will be equalized. So, W and W by R star or W or wage rate as compared to rent in country 1 and similarly to these, since they are different, but after trade there are possibility of equalization. These two might be converge to this particular point. So, this is one of the very good interpretation of this particular theory. So, therefore, Samuelson received Nobel Prize. So, broadly speaking, the Heckscher-Ohlin theory talks about specialization as well as exchange, and so exchange and they also added the demand for scarce factor as compared to the abundant factor, and there will be redistribution of income. So, the redistribution income of factors are very important in an international trade context. So, we have discussed those Heckscher-Ohlin theory in detail as part of the new classical framework. I hope it is understood, but we will cross check with these following questions. Here are the questions. You may raise your questions in our doubt class, we will have a doubt class. Keep a detailed note of your questions. There will be number of possibilities of doubts for sure, because this is one of the advanced theories in international trade discussions, and this gives large number of strategic trade situations. So, let us talk about one question here. A nation is said to have a relative abundance of capital if it has a what? A nation is said to have a relative abundance of capital. If it has what? Out of 4 options, if it has greater absolute amount of k, I do not think this is right. We have already said it has to be relatively abundant. Smaller absolute, this cannot be right. Higher labor to capital, if it is higher labor to capital, then it will be called as relative abundance of labor. So, why we are saying it is capital. So, last one is lower r by k. Lower r by k means relatively they have higher k by L. So, therefore, so this satisfies the question. So, D should be the answer. Similarly, if you check with factor price equalization related question, another MCQ based question, this is bit descriptive. So, please have patience to read and you can easily get the answer which is hidden inside the text. Now, the factor price equalization means that all workers are equally productive. Nowhere this is discussed. So, nowhere this is actually discussed in the theory. We cannot simply say that all the workers are going to be productive. If they are all the workers are productive, then we may not arrive into Heckscher-Ohlin theory and factor price equalization. So, this cannot be accepted. If a country fails to trade, its skilled workers will earn no more than its unskilled workers. If country fails to trade, skilled workers will earn no more than its unskilled workers. So, nowhere it is actually explained, and that too skilled workers will earn no more than, there is no reason behind, if there is no trade, then the skilled workers may earn more than that of the unskilled workers. So, it is not accepted so far as factor price equalization is concerned, and that too since they are saying fails to trade. So, no question of trade is taking place. First of all, in HO theory we explained trade must first take place, isn't it? So, trade causes the return to human capital to be the same as to the return to physical capital. So, human capital discussions are not made here. We are discussing labor. Human capital is a larger component which encapsulate education, health. So, these are not the features discussed in this theory. So, this is not defined. So, therefore, it is not the answer. For countries to trade freely, they must tax factors. So, tax wise is nowhere discussed production, so that farms in, and that too if the tax, the relative price of the factors will be higher. So, we have assumed from the beginning in the theory that taxes is not acceptable. So, this is not the answer. Similarly, last one, if you check it, probably will answer it, it may not be the answer, may not be the answer, let us check it. Free trade causes identical factors in different countries to be paid more nearly the same than they were in autarky. It says that identical factors, homogeneous factor which I said in the theory, they will be paid more nearly relatively the same than they were in autarky. So, basically whatever they were in autarky, they will be paid more. So, this is the answer for it. So, E is actually satisfying the factor price equalization, so that there will be distribution of income and it satisfies the Heckscher-Ohlin and simultaneous theorem. So, with this we have completed Heckscher-Ohlin model and a segment of income distribution of Samuelson theory. In the next class we will talk about other redistribution through specific factor model and some realistic check of the latest changes in international trade. So, any kind of doubt you can take off in other sessions. So, with this let me stop here. Thank you.